Every year in training camp, there are a couple of players that make a stronger push for the roster than you think, or maybe even for a starting job. And today, I want to go over a few of them on the Everyman series on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, Luke Braun. Let's find some joy today. You can find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is an audio platform or YouTube or even Amazon Fire or Roku or SiriusXM. We have a partnership with SiriusXM now as well, so you can find us on that podcasting app, which is pretty sweet. Thank you so much to those of you who do listen to this show every single day, especially here in the summer when we're doing the Everyman series. This is a series aiming to get to every man on the 90-man roster. I think I might be a little short on time for that, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But today I wanted to... This isn't really a take. It's more just an excuse to group these three players together because I like their stories are all really interesting to me. But if you think about it, there's always guys that are closer to the roster than you think, that you thought, these are camp bodies after thoughts, whatever. And then suddenly come cut down day, it's like, actually, maybe, surprise 53-man roster makes, that kind of thing. And here are a couple of candidates for that, which are Joejuan Williams, which is where we're going to start. And then also Trishton Jackson might be a dark horse for the 53-man roster. Who knows what happens kind of at the bottom of that wide receiver group, as well as Ross Blacklock, who you may have written off with how crowded that DT room is, but who's to say, right? This isn't really about their roster odds, though. This is about how these guys got here. And in some cases, like in Joejuan Williams' case, it's a rarity that they even made it this far. There are so many stories about the kid that's lucky to make it out. When you think about rougher parts of really any urban area in the country and a lot of places in the rural South, there are countless kids that play athletics, maybe are good enough at athletics to get a chance at the collegiate level, but just don't have the resources or don't have the support system required to pay that tuition or whatever of that tuition they need to get, or get the attention of a recruiter, or get the help they need potentially to get their grades up, to get, their academic eligibility. There's all kinds of reasons, right? Or just to stay in the sport entirely, right? What if a family can't afford the dues? We often hear about the lucky kid that gets out. And this is another one of those stories. With Joejuan Williams, it's about 9 years, 2010, I think is what it would be, about 9 years before he got drafted. And his mother is unwittingly with an undercover officer and ends up committing a drug-related crime. Don't worry about the details. That's not important. Point is, she's going to go away for a while. And, Miranda rights, jail, the whole deal. And it also means that she is going to lose custody of her kids, one of them being Joejuan Williams. So the kids have to go live with the grandparents for a little while. Money is very tight. They recall times when maybe we went a little hungry. Money's like that tight. And in those types of areas, in that particular part of Nashville, that is the kind of situation that very often breeds a kid that's going to go maybe get into a little bit of trouble, who's going to take things into his own hands, try to find a sense of community elsewhere because the world seems to have kind of forgotten you and your family. It's usually how that thought process tends to go. But he's also into athletics, and he is this, at this point, he's also growing up physically way taller than he is used to. And it's very funny, when you're 14, 15 and you're in athletics and suddenly you're 6'4" and you are not used to being that tall, it takes a little bit for you to relearn how to use your body. And so it would be very easy to miss him. And there are so many points in this story where it would be so easy to imagine Joejuan Williams being completely passed over and going down the route of the bajillion other kids that are in his situation and all end up in the same kind of place. That isn't the NFL, but it requires, there's a guy, I'll give it to Corey Phillips, who is somebody that works with him throughout his high school career and then ends up actually working with him in college too. But there are a lot of people that Joejuan Williams could credit this for, but we'll give it to Corey Phillips and I guess use him as the proxy, who is I think he's a cornerbacks coach at this point at Father Ryan, which is a fairly prestigious private Catholic school in the same area, and recruits him on scholarship to this school. This is a monumental change. And this is the kind of thing, I talk a lot about like the momentum, the inertia of a football player's career, young football player's career. You're a freshman and then you're a sophomore and you're maybe starting on the JV team, and then you're a junior and you're a senior, you're really playing and all that. And then maybe you get into college and all that. At this point, you are now at a place where people are going to notice you. And if you play well enough, you'll get noticed. Now, again, he's gangly, he's awkward, he's got to figure it out. But over the 3 years he's at Father Ryan, up until his junior year, he does figure it out. He ends up getting like a bunch of interceptions that year, playing well enough to get noticed by several SEC schools. It is also around this time that mom's back. And she's got a new lease on life. She goes and gets a job. She's trying to get her life back on track. But unfortunately for Joejuan Williams' football career, that job is pretty far away from Father Ryan. So he is going to transfer to public school. But because of completely insane eligibility rules, it's like if your school is within 20 miles of the private school and you transfer, then you have to sit a year out. And I guess that's just so that kids aren't like transferring back and forth willy-nilly to try to get like the transfer portal in college. I guess they just don't want that in high school, right? You don't want people like transferring schools for their football teams. Sure, right? So he gets stripped of his final year of eligibility. The senior high school season, he does not get to play. That is such a death knell, again, for so many high school football players. But he's done enough at Father Ryan where he's going to start to get college interest. And he gets interest from a bunch of colleges. I believe at this point, Corey Phillips works at Vanderbilt, which is where the school he's going to end up. But the real moment for that is that he gets like really overwhelmed with this process. I mean, you're picking a lot of colleges. They're all calling you all the time. They're trying to get it's a very stressful thing. And he has taken everything else that's going on in stride, but like this is the thing that stressed him out because it's a lot, right? It's your future. We all remember kind of trying to pick what we were going to do at being 17 or 18, trying to figure out college or what's going to happen next. And he sends out a tweet that's like, can all these schools just like back off for like a week so I can think? Vanderbilt's the only one that listens. They don't call or text that whole week. Vanderbilt it is. And hey, it's closest to home, right? So he ends up going to Vanderbilt and having a reasonably successful career there. But I kind of want to fast forward. Second round pick, New England Patriots. I want to fast forward to there. Because with Joejuan Williams, it was all like everything is kind of slow start, but he figures it out. At Father Ryan, he's got a slow start because he's still figuring out how to be 6'4". But by the time he's a junior in high school, he's figured it out, right? And he's played. And he's this athletic, dynamic, awesome corner. He goes to college. Hey, you're a freshman, right? You're gonna take a minute. You're not gonna get in all that much in your first year. It takes a little bit to get it figured out and all that. And by the time he's in his final year at Vanderbilt, I think he only went to school for 3 years. He declared early. He played so well. He could declare early and be a second round pick. He was doing great. And you get into, first, just appreciate that moment, right? The dignity of Bill Belichick's Patriots. In 2019, mind you, they're the defending champion New England Patriots. And compare that to the bordering on homeless kid in Nashville whose mom is in jail. And just thinking about all of the support systems that were in place that helped him get to there. There is something truly beautiful about just appreciating the it takes a village of it all. But you get into the Patriots and he starts out slow. Hey, look, Stephon Gilmore's still there. JC Jackson's there. Like, you're not going to get in a lot. But then those guys leave and he's still not getting in a lot. And he's getting usurped by younger players. And in 2022 preseason, he's snapping dangerously low. And he's actually maybe looking like he's a surprise cut, which, hey, there's a whole bunch of those in training camp all the time as well. First preseason game, he hurts his shoulder. He goes on IR, and he will not play for the entire 2022 season. So suddenly, we go from this, like the train's been on the tracks, ever since he got to Father Ryan. Hey, you had a good high school career, have a good college career, now you're in the NFL. The train is kind of off the tracks now for the first time. And it is certainly a reclamation project. And he started with the ones in camp with the Vikings, but now he's not with the ones anymore. That means that it's kind of do or die. Unless he wants to get, another team to invite them to their camp. And then you're going to be on a practice squad. And you're going to be that kind of player now instead of the second round pick oozing and dripping with potential. But hey, with all of these guys today, there is this world of untapped potential. But I think with Joejuan Williams, I must emphasize, it is super rare that he made it this far. And it's just going to take a lot to make it farther. But I don't think you need that to have respect for the career that he's already put together. We'll do Trishton Jackson and Ross Blacklock right after we talk about FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and they are America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, and that reason is that no sweat first bet. If you have not signed up for FanDuel before, if you're new to gambling entirely, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can claim a no sweat first bet. That means whatever your first bet is, if you whiff on it, if you get it wrong, you can get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets, and you can bet on anything at FanDuel from MLB, home run hitters, that kind of thing, to NBA futures, NBA draft props. That's coming up. You can bet on Vikings futures over under 8.5 wins, right? You can bet on player props. Will this player get so many yards? That kind of thing. Whatever it is, if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and claim that no sweat first bet, if you whiff on that first bet, whatever you place it on, you can get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, make every moment more. Thank you all so much, especially to those of you who are #everydayers who listen to this show every single day. Appreciate you guys quite a bit. Sound off if you can. I want to switch gears now to an interesting college rivalry. Maybe not the first one you think of, but certainly one of the biggest ones in the Big Ten, which is Michigan and Michigan State. That is, it divides the state of Michigan, right? And at University of Michigan, I think you probably think of as a more blue-blooded school. That's going to be the one that, is going to be a little bit more involved in the college football playoff and the championship odds and all that stuff. And outside of a few really special runs from Michigan State, that's kind of been the way it is. Michigan State, I don't know, I think of it more as a basketball school, but could be wrong. Michigan State, though, has more of like a blue-collar reputation, I guess. It is where, when I think of like Big Ten, ground and pound, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of football, like Michigan State's the school I'm kind of thinking of. And that workhorse reputation is what makes Trishton Jackson pick that side of the rivalry as he grows up in, I believe, the Detroit area. He is a Michigan State dude through and through. He grows up a fan of Michigan State. He wants to go to Michigan State. Through high school, he gets recruited to Michigan State. He is a Spartan, and he gets to go to his favorite college. It's one of those stories. There's a few of those guys all the time that are like, this is my school. This is what I want to do. Like, if you remember the Cincinnati guys, Ivan Pace and Wilson Huber. Wilson Huber in particular was the guy that like, hey, we're a Bearcats family. And Trishton Jackson, I think there's some Spartans, some Wolverines kind of in his circle, but it's the dream. That dream story. And he shows up as a true freshman. He actually gets in a little bit, which is a little ahead of the curve, right? Usually you'll see those, it's not uncommon to see a redshirt freshman year, and he actually gets in rotationally a little bit. But 2017 is when things come unraveled, as Trishton Jackson gets to know a whole bunch of his friends in the wide receiver room. You'll grow very close. There's a brotherhood to it. It's really weird to deal with it when somebody you're close to does something that like bad that you don't approve of. And in this case, those three of those players are going to be kicked off the team in a sexual assault scandal that you probably remember from the 2017 Michigan State Spartans if you were paying attention to college football back then. It's a weird thing to deal with. Trishton Jackson didn't have anything to do with it, but it was his friends. And how do you deal with it when your friends do something that makes you question if you knew who they are, you know? And how do you deal with that? But beyond that, and whatever the relationship is between him and those people is really, frankly, none of our business. But beyond that, how do you move forward on a team when your whole group is gone? It feels like almost a little lonely at Michigan State. And suddenly there are some things about the way that Mark D'Antonio, who Trishton Jackson really looked up to going in, again, it's that blue collar vibe that he brought to those teams that Trishton Jackson really loved. But suddenly, you don't have all your friends, and that sours the experience a little bit. And there are some my way or the highway style things that come with that blue collar kind of coach. You read things that Trishton Jackson was saying, and he doesn't say it in a way that's like throwing shade. He's just kind of honestly answering, hey, we didn't see eye to eye on things, and it was a little bit my way or the highway in Michigan State. It kind of reminds me of what you hear with, at the end of like Mike Zimmer's tenure here. It's like, hey, there's not really any dialogue here. It's kind of, you just say what you say. And if you're wrong, and even if I know you're wrong and you end up being wrong, there's kind of nothing I can do about it. That's really frustrating. That's a thing that can work for a lot of people, but it didn't work really well for Trishton Jackson. And maybe all of that stuff sort of sours the vibe and leads to a second season at Michigan State that's really disappointing. If you're going to get in a little bit and rotate in as a freshman, that's great. But then we expect big things of you as a sophomore, especially as a whole bunch of the freshmen or a whole bunch of the other wide receivers get kicked off the team. Now, suddenly, you're one of the longer tenured guys, but then there's like a couple of true freshmen that come in and like explode and totally leapfrog him on the depth chart. And he gets like 13 catches or something like that in the entire season. So his career is falling away, and his infatuation with Michigan State is falling away. I mean, this is 2 years going from I am a Spartans fan, go Spartans, everything Spartan, I'm going to be a Spartan, I'm so excited to be a Spartan, to I don't know if I actually like the Spartans. That sucks. That's a bad situation to be in. So he decides to go for the transfer. And he hops over to Syracuse, where he feels a little bit more of a connection, and he likes the vibe a little bit more, and he ends up having a good enough year at Syracuse to declare for the draft. He bets on himself. And both of these decisions are really betting on yourself, right? And saying, hey, this isn't the place for me. Maybe these other Michigan wide receivers are really just exploding, and that's, not for me. Things aren't working one place, but I think I can do it. Let me go to another place. And at Syracuse, he feels like he's done this, and he's created enough hype for himself to get drafted. And hey, even if I don't, I can make it in the pros, right? I can do this. There is this self-confidence that you got to have at that position at wide receiver. But perhaps dashing some of that confidence is going undrafted. And by the way, this is 2020, so there's all kinds of weird stuff that could happen in pre-draft and all that stuff. What if your pro day wasn't right? But he does end up signing as an undrafted free agent to the Los Angeles Rams. And he ends up going to 2020 Rams camp. Lo and behold, makes the team, makes the 53-man roster. So his bet, once again, kind of pays off. He says, this isn't my environment. In a better environment, I can do better. That pays off at Syracuse. Hey, I maybe I won't get drafted, but I can make it. And sure enough, he makes it, and he gets in as a special teamer, going all the way to the 2021 season on August 31st, 2021. So this is before the first week of the season in 2021. The Rams will cut him, or maybe that's like true cut down day, if I remember that year. And he ends up latching on to the Minnesota Vikings practice squad. He will spend the entire season there, and then he will go get closer than you think in 2022 to making the team again. Like, he's sort of a roster bubble kind of player. And that's the interesting kind of guy that can, find his way onto a roster when you maybe don't expect him to. Maybe we've all got the wrong guys penciled in. I'm putting Trishton Jackson in this kind of episode as a specific gift to Sam Ekstrom, who always talks about him on the Minnesota Football Party. But we do have somebody with maybe more realistic roster odds left to get to, and that is Ross Blacklock, who comes from more of a basketball background, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. The third and final story of the day starts in the late 60s in Texas Longhorns. The 1969 Texas Longhorns were one of the last all-white schools after everything else had sort of integrated. I mean, the late 50s, early 60s was when most of the Midwest had integrated, and the South had kind of mostly gotten to that point by then. But in 1969, Texas Longhorns, one of the last holdouts, and one of the first black athletes that they bring in is a guy by the name of Jim Blacklock. And Jimmy Blacklock, I guess, he describes we'll go with cold reception, where, I mean, first off, you walk into the all-white room of all-white players, you and like one other dude, and, you feel like they're looking at you like your head screwed on backwards. But also there's this like chalkboard write-up of like all these do's and don'ts and things that, all these different rules you have to follow. And it's like degrading. And it's very clear that like the kind of that it's this begrudging thing integrating the school. And that is the environment that Jimmy Blacklock gets used to in athletics. Now, these Longhorns are very much a successful team. And I think it's his sophomore year, Jimmy Blacklock is voted a captain. So clearly all of this animosity will wash away very, very quickly, as happened a lot, I think, in integrated schools and athletics. The subtle differences really melt away during two-a-days. You start to feel a little more together, But the reason I tell you all this is to give you a little bit of context for the sort of things that Ross Blacklock was primed to experience. This is the guy that was telling him this is what athletics are like, and this is what he had gone through. And he went through a relatively good career for the Texas Longhorns, and eventually became a Harlem Globetrotter in the 70s. And so when Ross Blacklock was a kid, there was a lot of traveling around with the Globetrotters. I believe you can still go see like Tonight Show appearances by Jimmy Blacklock, and all that stuff. You can find really fun black and white, old school, cool looking pictures, big afro, like the whole Globetrotter vibe. But that meant that there's a lot of traveling. That meant, a lot of dad's not here this weekend. But also Ross Blacklock really looked up to his dad in the way that many of us do, and really wanted to be like his dad. So really wanted to play basketball. Basketball was the passion. I want to play basketball like dad did. But there was simply no denying how much better he was at football. And Ross Blacklock was an every sport kind of, like, he did basketball. He could have honestly gone pro in baseball. He could have, I want to say he ran track. Like, he did all kinds of stuff. But there was nothing quite like football for him. Nothing that he excelled at quite like he excelled at football. And he played running back, and then he grew too big to be a running back and then played defensive tackle. Like, he was that athletic that he was a running back. And then they were like, wait, what if we had running back athleticism at defensive tackle? There's this crazy potential to it. But as is the case with sort of all of these stories, that potential is going to struggle to get realized in one way or another. He goes to TCU, Texas Christian. Again, hey, you're going to be in athletics in Texas. Maybe be aware of the way that you get treated and all that. Although by all accounts, everything at TCU is on the up and up. He will redshirt his first year at TCU, and his second year at TCU, he will sustain an Achilles injury that will ruin his entire season. 2 years not playing on the field. His third year, however, he plays well enough, and he is just like a good enough athlete where he gets a lot of attention from NFL teams. He is seen as like a day 2 defensive tackle pick, even though he only had one true season at TCU. He wins all kinds of honors, all Big 12, all that stuff, and decides to declare for the draft early, much like Joejuan Williams, and he does, and he gets drafted in the second round, much like Joejuan Williams. And much like Joejuan Williams, his pro career does not follow the successes of his college career, even though his college career was slow to start. He did well in that final year, well enough, and then he goes to play with the Texans. In his second game of his rookie season with the Texans, he gets ejected late in a game I believe was a blowout loss, so you're frustrated. He will get ejected for throwing a punch, and he'll get called out by J.J. Watt for it and all this, and it's this sort of ugly moment. I mean, listen to yesterday's show, though. This is not the kind of thing that should define him by any stretch of the imagination, but it is. The reason I bring it up is because it does define him in the eyes of a lot of Texans fans and media and all that stuff. And then suddenly, again, the inertia, the train is off the tracks at this point. Suddenly you're not the exciting second round pick. We're not thinking about you the way we would think about, say, a Mekhi Blackman this year, or, Lewis Seen or somebody like, hey, you're this kind of top 50-ish pick or top 100 pick in the case of Blackman, or was he like 1 or 2, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're not this potential guy anymore. Now you're the guy that threw a punch. And for whatever reason, he just struggles to get in on these Houston Texans teams. And this is the 2020 and 2021 Houston Texans. These are dysfunctional teams. I mean, this is rough, right? And then, of course, in the offseason, or in the preseason, I believe, like right before cutdown day, if I remember, he gets traded to the Vikings. The Houston Texans, who, again, see all this potential, and they see what he can do, but it's just not being realized for whatever reason. So really, with Blacklock, there is still this air of mystery to him, where he only kind of got 1 year in college. We only really got a handful of plays here and there with the Texans, and maybe that in and of itself is informative. But with Blacklock, who was the athlete of athletes in high school, right? Just the jock's jock with a jock for a dad, now having to scrape and scratch and claw and fight to keep his career alive at all. That makes, I think, for some compelling preseason TV, especially when you look at that DT room with a lot of guys with a lot of similar situations. I want to get to the Caleb Evan things that I promised you on yesterday's show. Maybe I will get to it tomorrow. We'll see. If not, hopefully next week. We'll get to it whenever, right? We got time here. So I will talk to you all then. And as always, Skull.